Our first question is from Ivy.
Hi, Ivy.
She says, I just recently started listening to the podcast. It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying them and hoping to catch up with the latest ones. Truly grateful. God bless your work.
Thanks, Ivy. That's a beautiful affirmation to receive.
She says, I saw a post on Instagram which said that according to the Catholic tradition, women aren't meant to wear trousers simply because
dear.
It's masculine. It said they should only be wearing feminine clothes
Dear.
Skirts and dresses. It said that because of modernism, people have embraced this clothing. But when when women wear clothes like jeans, it's suggestive, even if it was meant to be modest. Could you comment on this?
Oh, dear. Yes, I can comment on this. Let's just talk about Scotland.
Scotland?
Yes.
Okay.
Men wear kilts.
True.
In Scotland, right?
Okay.
Why are we talking about that? Because different cultures have different expressions, right? And when we confuse an objective principle with a subjective application, we will inevitably misunderstand things and cause trouble and havoc. So let's go back right to the New Testament, where Paul says that women should not enter the church with their heads uncovered, right? So in his time, the exposure of a woman's hair was inappropriate in public. This is not the case today, right? There are different cultural applications of objective truths. The objective truth is we should be dressing in such a way that upholds and honors the dignity of both men and women, right? But that is going to be applied differently based on custom and period of history and cultural setting and background. I'd urge Ivy and all the listeners to read the section in John Paul II's Love and Responsibility on Modesty, where he is very clear on the different cultural applications. The principle, again, is to dress in such a way that the dignity of both sexes is upheld. But he brings up the example of primitive peoples, where women often in primitive cultures are topless. And he tells the story of missionaries who would come into these situations and they would project their own cultural standards onto this different culture and demand that the women cover their breasts. Well, he unfolds the story that in this particular culture, women started covering their breasts, and in covering their breasts, they realized they were drawing more attention to them.
Wow.
And so they started covering their breasts in such a way that they could excite more attention. And the moral of the story is, in this culture, the covering of the breast became something that elicited an immodesty that hadn't been there when the breasts were uncovered. Wow. So that is a case of projecting one cultural standard onto another culture. When we read things like, in the olden days, women always wore skirts. Well, in what olden days, in what culture, in what situation, and please explain what that has to do with our time today. We have different cultural standards. We are in a different situation. The principle that is applicable in every time, in every culture, in every place, is to dress and hold oneself in such a way that the dignity of both sexes is properly honored. How that gets applied in various cultures is going to be different. And it's also going to be complex and complicated. And especially when you have a crossing of cultures, this culture crossing into this culture, saying that's immodest, that's immodest. Modesty comes from the heart. It is a virtue of the human heart. And this means that a given piece of clothing in and of itself, you can't put a piece of clothing on a table and say, that's immodest. Well, because it's impossible for an inanimate object to be modest or immodest. The virtue of modesty only comes into play when we're talking about human beings and what's going on in their hearts. And John Paul II says, Immodesty happens when one dresses or behaves in such a way with the explicit intention to arouse lust in others. So could it be the case that women wear slacks or jeans to arouse lust in men? It certainly could be. And in those cases, it's immodest. Could it be that a woman is wearing a dress in such a way to incite lust in others? Yes, it could be. So you can't place the evaluation of modesty on the clothing itself. One has to look at the motives of the heart.
And I just sense in there something in the messaging, about women's clothing, something of a little fearfulness and maybe scrupulosity.
Yes.
There's some inner dynamics it seems to reveal that just sort of a grasping at control over a situation we can't completely control, which is kind of how we're perceived by others and thinking somehow we can control by following these certain rules. Make sure, especially God knows, that we're on the good side.
Right.
I mean, that sounds a little accusatory. I do mean it in a loving insight to say, like, God knows our hearts.
Yes.
And it's not wrong to wear skirts and dresses. It's not wrong to wear jeans and pants. It's kind of a wrong to maybe focus a little too much on that.
Yes.
I think is our feeling and our sense of things.
Yes. I'll tell a funny story just because we need to be lighthearted about these things. This was from my anthropology studies in my undergraduate work. I think you've probably heard me tell these stories before, Wendy.
I have heard it. Yes.
But for the sake of our listeners, there was a missionary, again, a cross-cultural situation, missionary going into a primitive culture. And he initially was accepting of the fact that women were topless, but there was the head of his order coming to evaluate the success of the mission at one point. So he got a little nervous, and he handed out shirts for all the women to wear when the bishop or the head of the order, I don't know if he was a bishop, when he showed up. And the women had put the shirts on, but they had also cut big circles out so that their breasts were still exposed, which is humorous. This is a case of just crossing cultures. And it's important to recognize there is nothing immodest about the human body itself, right? We should never blame the goodness of the body for our degradation of it or our lustful approach to it. We cover our bodies, and this is probably the most important principle in this conversation. We cover our bodies in a fallen world, not because they're bad. We cover our bodies in a fallen world because they're so good. And we feel, or at least we should feel, an instinctive need to protect the goodness of the body from the degradation of lust. Dress in such a way, and more importantly, live from your heart in such a way that you understand and know the dignity of your body. And if you know you'll be sending out like radar waves, to others, that I know the dignity of my body and don't mess with it. And that is much more important than whether you're wearing a dress or whether you're wearing jeans.